You know what really gets me? We're watching history repeat itself in real time, and nobody in that Cleveland front office seems to care. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want raw, unfiltered football truth. We're pushing hard to hit 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you matters in building this community. Your support means everything, so smash that like button and let's grow this thing together. The Cleveland Browns just named Shedeur Sanders their number 2 quarterback heading into the Pittsburgh game, and immediately the alarm bells started ringing. Jason Lloyd from The Athletic dropped a bomb that explains everything about what's really happening behind closed doors. The Browns are scared, legitimately terrified, not of keeping Shedeur, but of releasing him. Why? Because they already lived through this nightmare once before with Baker Mayfield, and the scars still haven't healed. This franchise is so traumatized by their past mistakes that they're about to make the exact same error all over again, just in a different package. Let me break down what's actually happening here, because the surface story doesn't tell you half of it. When you name a guy your backup quarterback, but you won't release him, trade him, or give him meaningful reps, what does that tell you? It tells you that the organization doesn't believe in him enough to play him, but they're absolutely petrified that someone else will. That's not strategy, that's insecurity dressed up in a depth chart. The Browns are holding Shedeur Sanders hostage to their own fears, and everyone can see it except the people making the decisions. Think about the Baker Mayfield situation for a second, because it's the blueprint for understanding everything that's happening right now. Cleveland drafted Baker first overall in 2018. The guy came in with swagger, confidence, and a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't the prototypical quarterback they imagined in their perfect world, but he won games. He gave that fan base hope for the first time in forever. Then what happened? The moment things got rocky, the moment he didn't fit their narrow definition of what a franchise quarterback should look and act like, they turned on him. They said they wanted a grown-up. They said they needed someone more professional, more polished, more controllable. So they shipped him out, brought in Deshaun Watson with all that guaranteed money, and watched Baker go to Tampa Bay and absolutely ball out. Now fast forward to today, and the Browns are staring at Shedeur Sanders, wondering if they're about to write the same painful chapter twice. The difference this time is they know what's coming. They've already seen this movie. They know that if they let Shedeur walk and he ends up thriving somewhere else, the national media will eviscerate them. The fans will revolt. The talking heads will spend years asking how Cleveland managed to mess up another promising quarterback situation. So instead of making a decision based on football, based on development, based on what's actually best for the player and the team, they're making a decision based on fear of embarrassment. Let's talk about what the analysts said, because they nailed it from every angle. The first question that came up was simple and devastating. If you can't develop him, why do you care what happens to him somewhere else? That's the question Cleveland can't answer honestly, because the truth is they don't care about Shedeur's development. They care about their reputation. They care about not being the punchline again. They care about controlling the narrative, even if it means stunting a young player's growth. That's not leadership, that's ego management. And it's exactly why this franchise keeps spinning its wheels decade after decade. Someone else jumped in and pointed out that at the time, Cleveland moved on from Baker. They didn't want him. They made that crystal clear. They wanted someone different, someone they thought fit their vision better. Baker had to take detours through Carolina and other stops before landing in Tampa, where the system and the culture finally let him be himself. And guess what happened? He flourished. He became the quarterback Cleveland always had, but refused to believe in. Now they're looking at Shedeur with that same skeptical eye, that same need to force him into a box he might not fit, and they're wondering why it feels so familiar. The reality is some quarterbacks are flashy, some are confident, some carry themselves with a swagger that makes traditional football people uncomfortable. That doesn't make them bad quarterbacks. It makes them different, and different can be special if you give it room to breathe. But Cleveland has never been good at that. They want their quarterbacks to be a certain way, talk a certain way, lead a certain way. When a guy doesn't fit that mold, they panic, they doubt, they start looking for reasons why it won't work, instead of finding ways to make it work. That's the culture problem nobody wants to address, but it's the root of everything. Here's where it gets even more interesting. If Cleveland truly believed Shedeur wasn't ready or wasn't the guy, they'd have no problem releasing him or trading him for whatever value they could get. Teams do that all the time with players who don't fit their plans. But the fact that they're hesitating, that they're keeping him on the roster in this weird limbo, tells you everything. They're hedging. They're playing both sides. They want to keep him close enough that if he does develop into something special, they can claim credit. But they don't want to invest in him enough to actually find out what he can do. That's the worst possible approach because it benefits nobody. Not Shedeur, not the team, not the fans. One analyst compared it to a relationship, and honestly, that's the perfect metaphor. If you're in a relationship and you can't give someone what they need, you can't be mad when they go find happiness somewhere else. You don't get to keep them locked down just because you're scared they'll prove you wrong with someone else. That's selfish, that's toxic, and that's exactly what Cleveland is doing with Shedeur Sanders right now. They're not giving him what he needs to grow, but they won't let him go find it elsewhere because their egos can't handle watching him succeed without them. The Tampa Bay situation with Baker should have been a wake-up call. That environment was perfect for him. The coaching staff believed in him. The front office supported him. The offensive system played to his strengths instead of trying to change who he was. That's what development looks like. That's what happens when an organization gets out of its own way and lets talent shine. Cleveland could have had that. They had the raw materials, but they were too busy trying to remake Baker into something he wasn't. And by the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Now they're staring down the barrel of the exact same mistake with a different name on the jersey. What makes this situation even more frustrating is that Cleveland isn't known for developing quarterbacks. Go down the list: Brady Quinn, Brandon Whedon, Johnny Manziel, Cody Kessler, Deshaun Kaiser, Baker Mayfield. The pattern is obvious and it's brutal. They draft these guys with hope and promise, then systematically destroy their confidence through instability, poor coaching decisions, and unrealistic expectations. The city falls in love with the idea of the savior, but the organization never provides the foundation for success. It's a cycle that's been repeating for over 2 decades, and nobody seems capable of breaking it. Reports came out that the Browns ownership wasn't even a big believer in Shedeur from the beginning. Think about what that means. The people at the very top, the ones writing the checks and making the final calls, already had doubts before this kid even got a real chance. When belief doesn't start from the top, it never filters down. You can have the best position coaches in the world, but if the front office is already lukewarm, the player never gets a fair shake. That doubt seeps into everything. It affects how much practice time he gets, what kind of plays are designed for him, how quickly they lose patience when things don't go perfectly. The analysts who've been in NFL locker rooms understand this dynamic better than anyone. They've seen what happens when a franchise loses faith in a player but refuses to admit it publicly. That tension becomes toxic. Veterans start whispering in the hallways. Young players start doubting their own futures. The entire culture shifts from believing in possibilities to protecting against failure. That's where Cleveland has been stuck for years, and Shedeur is just the latest victim of that mentality. But here's the thing about Shedeur Sanders that makes this whole situation so infuriating. This kid is different. He's not fragile. He's not desperate for validation. He carries himself with a quiet confidence that doesn't need constant reinforcement. He's been under the spotlight his entire life with Deion as his father, so the pressure of the NFL doesn't shake him the way it might shake other rookies. He's ready for the moment. He's just waiting for someone to actually give him the moment. And when that happens, whether it's in Cleveland or somewhere else, the league is going to remember his name. The comparison to Baker keeps coming up because it's impossible to ignore. Both guys came in with swagger and confidence. Both guys didn't fit the traditional quarterback mold that old school football people worshipped. Both guys had the talent to succeed if given the right environment. The difference is Baker had to learn the hard way that Cleveland wasn't that environment. Shedeur is getting to watch that lesson play out before it's too late for him. If the Browns don't figure out how to develop him, how to trust him, how to let him be who he is, he'll find his way to a team that will, and when he does, Cleveland will be stuck asking the same painful questions they've been asking for 20 years. The fear of being embarrassed again is controlling every decision Cleveland makes with Shedeur. They don't want another situation where they let a quarterback walk and he becomes a star elsewhere. But the irony is that by trying to avoid that embarrassment, they're guaranteeing it happens again. Because Shedeur isn't going to sit on a bench forever waiting for an organization that doesn't believe in him. He's going to force his way to an opportunity one way or another. And when he gets there, when he's lighting up defenses and leading a team to wins, everyone will point back to Cleveland and ask how they managed to screw this up again. This isn't just about football decisions. This is about organizational psychology and how fear can paralyze an entire franchise. The Browns are so haunted by their mistakes with Baker that they can't see straight with Shedeur. They're making emotional decisions disguised as logical ones. They're protecting their pride instead of building for the future. That's how losing organizations stay losing organizations. Winners make tough decisions based on what's best for winning. Losers make safe decisions based on what's best for avoiding criticism. What Cleveland needs to do is simple, but requires courage they haven't shown in years. If you believe in Shedeur, actually invest in him. Give him meaningful reps. Design an offense that plays to his strengths. Create an environment where he can grow without constantly looking over his shoulder. If you don't believe in him, be honest about it and let him go to a team that does. Don't keep him in this weird purgatory where he's too valuable to release, but not valued enough to develop. That's the worst of both worlds, and it helps nobody. The development piece is critical because that's where Cleveland has failed over and over again. They bring in talented quarterbacks, then surround them with chaos. Coaching staffs change every couple years. Offensive systems get overhauled. The offensive line is either injured or mediocre. The weapons are inconsistent. How is any quarterback supposed to develop in that environment? You can't. And then when the quarterback struggles, everyone points at him and says he wasn't good enough. It's a rigged game, and Shedeur is smart enough to see it. One of the analysts pointed out that some quarterbacks need to be in a system that lets them be themselves. That's not revolutionary, that's just common sense. Baker needed a system that let him use his mobility, his quick decision-making, his improvisation skills. Tampa gave him that. Cleveland tried to turn him into a pocket passer who fit their preconceived notions. It didn't work. The same principle applies to Shedeur. If Cleveland tries to force him into being something he's not, it'll fail, just like it failed with Baker. But if they build around his actual skills and let him play his game, the results might surprise everyone. The problem is Cleveland doesn't trust their own evaluations. They don't trust their coaches. They don't trust their development programs. So when they look at a quarterback like Shedeur who doesn't fit the traditional mold, they panic. They start second guessing. They start looking for reasons why it won't work instead of building reasons why it will. That mindset is a cancer for any organization, but especially for one trying to develop a young quarterback. What makes this entire saga so frustrating for fans and analysts is that the solution is obvious. Either commit to Shedeur completely and give him everything he needs to succeed, or admit he's not your guy and trade him to a team that will commit to him. Don't do this half-measure nonsense where you keep him on the roster but refuse to invest in his development. That helps nobody, and it guarantees the exact outcome Cleveland is trying to avoid. The Tampa Bay comparison keeps haunting this conversation because it's such a perfect example of what happens when an organization gets it right. Baker went from being labeled a bust in Cleveland to being a legitimate franchise quarterback in Tampa. Nothing about Baker's talent changed. What changed was the environment around him. The coaching staff believed in him. The front office supported him. The offensive system was designed for his skill set. That's development. That's what good organizations do. Cleveland could do the same thing with Shedeur, but it requires them to get out of their own way and stop letting fear drive decisions. Reports suggest that ownership's lack of belief in Shedeur from the start has poisoned the well. When the guys at the top don't believe, it trickles down through every level of the organization. Position coaches feel it. Coordinators feel it. Other players feel it. That doubt becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the player never gets the full support needed to succeed. Then when things don't work out, ownership points to the results and says, "See, we were right to doubt him." It's a vicious cycle that Cleveland has been trapped in for decades. The analysts who've been in NFL locker rooms understand this dynamic intimately. They've watched franchises destroy young quarterbacks through instability and doubt. They've seen how quickly a promising career can derail when the organization doesn't provide proper support. That's why they're so vocal about what's happening with Shedeur. They recognize the warning signs. They see Cleveland setting up for another disaster, and they're trying to sound the alarm before it's too late. Shedeur's confidence and composure are assets that should be valued, not viewed with suspicion. In today's NFL, you need a quarterback who can handle pressure, who doesn't get rattled by adversity, who believes in himself even when others doubt. Shedeur has all of that. He's been groomed for this his entire life. The spotlight doesn't scare him. The expectations don't crush him. He's ready. The only question is whether Cleveland is ready to actually give him a real chance, or if they're going to let fear and doubt sabotage another potential franchise quarterback. The Baker Mayfield story should be required reading for everyone in the Browns organization. It's a case study in how not to handle a young quarterback. It shows exactly what happens when an organization lets outside noise and internal doubt override their evaluation and development process. Baker had the talent, he had the competitiveness, he had the leadership qualities, but Cleveland couldn't get past the fact that he didn't look and act like the quarterbacks from their imagined perfect world. So they moved on, and now they get to watch him succeed elsewhere while they're stuck trying to make sense of the Deshaun Watson situation. Everything about how Cleveland is handling Shedeur screams insecurity. Confident organizations make decisive moves. They either commit fully or they move on cleanly. They don't hedge their bets and create weird limbo situations that help nobody. The fact that Cleveland is reportedly hesitant to release Shedeur specifically because of what happened with Baker tells you everything you need to know. They're not making football decisions anymore. They're making emotional decisions based on past trauma, and that's a recipe for continued failure. The perfect environment for a young quarterback includes belief from the top down, stability in coaching and systems, weapons to throw to, protection up front, and patience to let them learn and grow. Cleveland has historically struggled to provide any of those things consistently. That's not Shedeur's fault. That's not Baker's fault. That's an organizational failure that spans multiple regimes and decades. Until that fundamental culture changes, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. The results will keep being the same disappointment wearing different jerseys. What's happening with Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland is bigger than one player or one franchise. It's a mirror showing us how fear and ego can paralyze decision-making at the highest levels. It's a reminder that talent alone isn't enough without the right environment to nurture it. And it's a warning that unless organizations learn from their mistakes, instead of just repeating them with different names, the cycle of disappointment will never end. Shedeur deserves better than being caught in Cleveland's emotional storm. He deserves a real chance to show what he can do. Whether he gets that chance in Cleveland or elsewhere remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: when Shedeur Sanders finally gets his opportunity to shine, the whole league is going to remember how Cleveland fumbled another chance at greatness because they were too scared to believe.